You'll regret this, Carla. Sarah's voice echoed through the night air as the police escorted her off my property. You'll end up old and alone. I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against the wood that separated me from the family I thought I knew. The sirens were fading now, but the sound of my own heartbeat filled the silence. How had it come to this? How had the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally become strangers trying to break into my home? 3 hours earlier, I had been nothing more than a sick woman curled up on her couch with a box of tissues. Now I was a daughter who had called the police on her own parents. The memory of that 10th birthday cake floated back to me unbidden. Pink frosting, frilly dress, and my mother's voice, "You'll look just like Sarah." Even then, at 10 years old, I had known something was wrong. I hadn't wanted to look like Sarah. I had wanted to look like me. But tonight, sitting on my hallway floor with tears streaming down my face, I realized that wanting to be myself had always been my greatest crime in their eyes. My name is Carla, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. My younger sister Sarah burst into the world like a supernova, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. From day one, she had our parents wrapped around her little finger. Me? I was the quiet one, more interested in my chemistry set than in making friends. The inequality wasn't just in attention, it was in the very fabric of how love was distributed in our household. My parents, I now understand, were products of their own upbringing. My mother had grown up the middle child of 7, fighting for scraps of attention from overwhelmed parents. When Sarah arrived with her natural charm and beauty, Mom saw in her the golden child she herself had never been allowed to be. My father, raised by a stern military man who believed emotions were weakness, found it easier to shower affection on the daughter who demanded it rather than the one who quietly earned it. I still remember my 10th birthday with painful clarity. I'd been hoping for a new microscope, dropping hints for weeks. Instead, I got a frilly dress that made me look like a cupcake. "But Mom, I hate dresses," I protested. "Nonsense, you'll look just like Sarah," she beamed, completely missing the point. That phrase would haunt me for years. Just like Sarah, as if being myself wasn't enough, had never been enough. As we grew older, the divide only widened. Sarah breezed through school on charm and good looks, while I buried myself in books and science experiments. The dinner table became a stage where Sarah's performances were always the main act, and my achievements were relegated to intermission. "Did you hear Sarah's been nominated for prom queen?" Mom gushed over dinner one night. "That's great," I mumbled, trying to muster some enthusiasm. I won first place in the science fair today." "Oh, that's nice, dear," Dad said absently, already turning back to Sarah. "So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet?" The pattern was so consistent that I began to wonder if I was invisible. Perhaps I was a ghost haunting my own family, speaking words that no one could hear, achieving things that no one could see. The state science fair in my senior year felt like my moment to shine. I'd spent months perfecting my project on sustainable biofuels, staying up late in the garage that had become my makeshift laboratory. The project represented everything I loved about science: the methodical process, the careful hypothesis testing, the moment of breakthrough when everything clicked into place. When they announced the winners, I could hardly believe my ears. First place goes to Carla Johnson. I was ecstatic. Finally, something even my parents couldn't ignore. Or so I thought. That's great, honey, Mom said distractedly when I told her the news, but we can't make it to the awards ceremony. Sarah has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her. I watched them fuss over Sarah's costume and makeup, my trophy gathering dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I was getting used to. The weight of their indifference had become a familiar companion, settling into my chest like a stone I carried everywhere. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could barely contain my excitement. Full scholarship to a prestigious university, it was more than I dared to hope for. This was my ticket out, my chance to find a place where being smart and curious wasn't seen as a character flaw. Mom, Dad, I got in. I burst into the living room, waving the letter. Full ride and everything. Mom glanced up from her magazine. That's nice, dear. Sarah, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress? Just like that, my big moment was brushed aside again. The scholarship that would change my life was deemed less important than Sarah's prom dress. I realized then that I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, or discover life on Mars, and it would still be secondary to Sarah's latest trivial concern. But it's a full scholarship. I tried again, my voice smaller this time. Dad patted my shoulder absently. Good job, kiddo. Sarah, princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything, can we? I watched them pile into the car, my acceptance letter crumpled in my fist. The familiar ache of invisibility settled deeper into my bones. But this time, something else stirred alongside it, a small flame of defiance. Maybe I didn't need their approval to succeed. Maybe I could build a life where my achievements mattered, where I mattered. Despite the lack of fanfare from my family, I packed my bags and headed off to college with high hopes. For the first time, I was free from Sarah's shadow, free to be just Carla. College was a revelation. Suddenly, my passion for science wasn't weird or nerdy, it was respected, even admired. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. The dormitory became my sanctuary. My roommate, Jessica, was a pre-med student who understood the thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. For the first time in my life, I had found people who spoke my language. We would stay up late discussing everything from quantum mechanics to bioethics, and I felt my mind expanding in ways I never thought possible. Meanwhile, Sarah followed the path our parents had always dreamed of for her. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. College is so hard, she whined during one of our rare phone calls. I don't know how you do it, Carla. I bit back the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, I just mumbled some vague encouragement and changed the subject. Even from hundreds of miles away, I found myself protecting her feelings, smoothing her path. It was during my sophomore year that Sarah dropped her bombshell. I'm engaged, she squealed over the phone. Mike proposed last night. Isn't it romantic? Mike, her high school sweetheart, the guy who'd once asked me if science was, like, really hard and stuff. I had known Mike since we were teenagers, had watched him coast through life on his charm and good looks. He was the kind of person who expected things to be handed to him, who had never learned the value of hard work because he'd never needed to. "That's great, Sarah," I managed, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "Have you set a date?" "We're thinking right after graduation," she gushed. "Oh, Carla, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you?" The wedding was exactly as you'd expect. Sarah was radiant in her expensive dress. Mike looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, pasting on a smile for the photos. "Isn't this perfect?" Mom whispered to me during the reception. "This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter." I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day, after all. Even in my moment of rebellion, I couldn't bring myself to shatter the illusion. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful?" I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, as if my dedication to my career was somehow a personal failing. Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. "You know, Carla," Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee, "you're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm focused on my career right now, Dad." Mom clucked her tongue. "Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters." I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. The irony wasn't lost on me. They valued family above all else, except when it came to valuing me as part of that family. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, I was a senior researcher at a prestigious lab. My parents' response to this news? A distracted, "That's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. I had learned to expect nothing else, but the dismissals still stung. My professional achievements, which had taken years of dedication and sacrifice, were deemed less newsworthy than my nephew's first steps. It was around this time that I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally, while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. Every dollar I put away was a small act of defiance, a way of building something that would be mine alone. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. The house represented everything I had worked for. It was spacious and bright, with a large kitchen perfect for entertaining friends from work, a study where I could read and research, and a garden where I could grow the vegetables I'd always dreamed of tending. For the first time in my life, I would have a space that was entirely my own. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house?" Mom repeated. All by yourself? Yes, all by myself, I said, my excitement deflating a little. It's a great investment, but it's such a big house for one person, Mom interrupted. What will you do with all that space? I sighed. I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine. Well, she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve. I suppose if that's what you want. Oh, did I tell you Emma lost her first tooth yesterday? And just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. My milestone was dismissed, my joy diminished. I should have expected it, but it still hurt. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. The living room became a showcase for my collection of scientific texts and nature photography. The kitchen was outfitted with professional-grade equipment that I dreamed of owning. The garden became my sanctuary, where I could lose myself in the simple pleasure of nurturing life. For the first time, I felt truly at peace. This was my space, my sanctuary, my achievement. No one could take it away from me, or so I thought. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. Sarah's calls, too, became more strained. There was something brewing beneath the surface, something that made my skin crawl with unease. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "We're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. I spent the week leading up to the dinner with a knot in my stomach, trying to imagine what they could want to discuss. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. The house looked smaller than I remembered, more cramped. I noticed the paint peeling on the shutters, the small cracks in the driveway that hadn't been there before. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. I tried to make conversation about work, about Emma and Liam's activities, about anything that might cut through the oppressive atmosphere. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." "Here it comes," I thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie, we've been thinking about that big house of yours. It's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "Okay, and we think," my mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, "that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out." For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell "gotcha" and reveal it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were asking me to give up everything I had worked for. You can't be serious, I finally managed. Now, Carla, my mother said, her tone patronizing, don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do. Selfish? I repeated, my voice rising. How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself? It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need, my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. And what do you have to say about this? She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family was asking me to give up my home, acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. The audacity of it took my breath away. Here I was, successful and independent, and they still saw me as the expendable one. No, I said firmly, standing up. Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house. As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard my father call out, think about it, Carla. Family should come first. Family should come first. The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove home. But which family? The one that had ignored my achievements, dismissed my dreams, and was now trying to steal my home? Or the family I had built for myself, my colleagues, my work, my sanctuary? The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, unable to believe my family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? How could they sit there with straight faces and tell me to give up everything I had worked for? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to hear their justifications, their guilt trips, their attempts to make me feel like the villain in this story. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, I answered. Hello? Is this Carla? A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. Yes, who's this? This is your Aunt Mildred. I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you. I felt my blood pressure rising. Aunt Mildred, that's not. In my day, she continued, not letting me get a word in. Family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers. I'm not hoarding anything, I snapped. It's my house. I bought it with my own money. Well, she huffed. If you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway. I was so shocked I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me. You heard me, she said primly. You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock. I hung up without another word, my hand shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? The violation felt complete now. They didn't just want my house, they wanted my very biology to serve their purposes. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. Carla, dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house. Cousin Betty sent a text, heard about the house situation. Maybe you should think about what's really important in life. Family comes first. Uncle Ron called to lecture me about the importance of generosity. You know, Carla, when I was your age, we understood that success came with responsibility. You can't just think about yourself all the time. It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to dread checking my phone, wincing every time it buzzed. The family members who had never bothered to call me before were suddenly very interested in my life, but only to tell me how to live it. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. The familiar routine of research and experimentation became my refuge. In the lab, logic prevailed. Hypotheses were tested, results were measured, and truth was objective. It was the opposite of the emotional manipulation I was facing at home. It was during one of these late nights at work that I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it, a noise at my front door. Like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping toward the door. Through the window, I could see figures on my porch. Familiar figures. My blood ran cold as I recognized them. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. "What the hell are you doing?" There, caught red-handed, were my parents and Sarah. They looked like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was holding what looked like a lockpick set. My father had a crowbar, and Sarah was standing behind them with her arms full of boxes. "Carla, dear," my mother was the first to recover. "We were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. My father, at least, had the decency to look embarrassed. "We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay?" I was practically shouting now. "What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone?" Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home." I noticed for the first time that there was a moving truck parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. They weren't just going to ask me to leave. They were going to move Sarah in whether I agreed or not. "You were going to move in," I said, my voice flat. "You were actually going to move into my house without my permission." "Now, Carla," my mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative." "You thought wrong," I cut her off. "This is my house. Mine. I bought it with my own money. Money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it." Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, mouthing, "Police?" I nodded, grateful for their concern. Turning back to my family, I said, "I've called the police. You need to leave now." "You wouldn't." My father scoffed. "Your own family?" As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled. The police car pulled up, and two officers got out. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, eyeing the scene warily. I took a deep breath. "Yes, officer. These people were attempting to break into my home." "Carla," my mother gasped. "How could you?" The officers looked at my family. "Is this true?" My father started to stammer out an explanation, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." As the officers escorted my family off my property, I stood in the doorway, shaking. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My own family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, had tried to steal my home. "You'll regret this, Carla," Sarah called over her shoulder as they were leaving. "You'll end up old and alone." I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. The confrontation I had been dreading for weeks was finally over, but the victory felt hollow. My phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, dysfunctional as it had been. It was in this tumultuous state that I received an unexpected message. It was from my Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd had a falling out with my mom over some old family drama. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Cafe Blue at 4 o'clock, the message read. "There are things you need to know." Intrigued and desperate for any ally, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Maggie in a cozy corner of Cafe Blue. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Carla," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side, but there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." My curiosity piqued. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. "Your parents and Sarah, they're in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why? How?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Maggie continued. "Mike has a gambling problem. A bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years, chasing losses with bigger and bigger bets." The pieces started to fall into place. The desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure, the way they'd all seemed so coordinated in their approach. "But what about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They've been barely keeping their heads above water ever since. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house." I sat back, stunned. "How do you know all this?" "I work at the bank where they all have accounts," Aunt Maggie explained. "I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family." My mind was reeling. All this time, while I'd been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole, and they'd tried to drag me down with them. The house they wanted wasn't just a convenience, it was their lifeline, their way out of financial ruin. But they'd rather destroy my life than face the consequences of their choices. "Carla," Aunt Maggie said gently, I know this is a lot to take in, but I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea." Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diana, who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. He's been funneling money to her for months, Diana explained, showing us bank statements and hotel receipts. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. But where did he get the money? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Diana's face grew grim. From his gambling wins, when he had them, and from your parents. They've been giving him money, thinking it was for Sarah and the kids. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. Not only had my family tried to steal my house, but the money they'd lost, money that could have solved their problems, had been going to fund Mike's affair with our own cousin. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very house they had tried to take from me would be the stage for their undoing. I sent out invitations to the extended family, keeping the purpose vague. Family reunion, I called it. Important news to share. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought I was going to cave to their demands, that I'd realized the error of my ways, and was ready to hand over the keys. Uncle Bob arrived with his usual bluster, slapping my father on the back and making jokes about my big empty house. Aunt Mildred swept in with her judgmental sniff, eyeing my decor with obvious disapproval. Sarah came in last, looking nervous but trying to project confidence. Once everyone was seated in my living room, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know," I began. I laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from their faces. The room grew quieter and quieter until you could hear a pin drop. Sarah jumped up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not true," she screamed. "Mike, tell them it's not true." But Mike was already halfway to the door, his face ashen. Uncle Bob, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. "You son of a," he growled. "That's my daughter you've been fooling around with." My parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their exposed financial ruin seemingly more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal my house. The pyramid scheme, the loans, the desperate attempts to keep up appearances, it was all out in the open now. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began to stammer out apologies. "We had no idea," Aunt Mildred muttered. "Carla, we're so sorry." As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being judged. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Sarah, unable to forgive Mike's infidelity and financial betrayal, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house within a month. The pyramid scheme losses, combined with the money they'd given Mike, had left them with nothing. They were forced to downsize to a small rented apartment, all five of them crammed into a space smaller than my living room. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling a mixture of sadness and vindication. The family that had once seemed so perfect, so deserving of everything, had been built on lies and poor choices. As for me, after much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. The betrayal had been too deep, the damage too complete. "You're doing the right thing, Carla," Aunt Maggie assured me one afternoon over coffee. "It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being." Aunt Maggie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. She understood the pain of being rejected by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life, a reminder that family wasn't just about blood, it was about choice, respect, and genuine care. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new routine. Without the constant drama and demands of my family, I had time to focus on myself. But with that came a startling realization: I was lonely. The house that had once felt like my sanctuary now felt too quiet, too empty. I had fought so hard to keep it, but what was the point if I had no one to share it with? "You know, Carla," Aunt Maggie said one day, "there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new?" With her encouragement, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. That's where I met Alex. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope. When he turned and flashed me a warm smile, I felt my heart skip a beat. "First time?" he asked, noticing my nervous fidgeting with the equipment. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As we talked, I learned he was a wildlife photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. He understood the value of patience, of waiting for the perfect moment, of finding beauty in unexpected places. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Alex was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. He had his own story of family estrangement, his own journey of building a life on his own terms. We began dating, our shared love for nature and understanding of complex family situations bringing us closer together. He would come to my house for dinner, and we'd cook together in my beautiful kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. He appreciated the space I had created, saw it as a reflection of my strength and independence, rather than a symbol of my isolation. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to me. The idea of building a family with someone who truly valued me, who saw my achievements as worthy of celebration, felt like a dream come true. Through it all, Aunt Maggie remained my steadfast support. She became the mother figure I had always yearned for but never had. One day, as we sat in her garden watching the sunset, she took my hand in hers. "Carla," she said, her eyes misty, "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, I marveled at how much my life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. 6 months later, Alex and I were married in a small ceremony in my backyard, surrounded by friends from work and the few family members who had supported me through everything. Aunt Maggie walked me down the aisle, beaming with pride. As I looked around at the faces of the people who truly loved me, I realized that the house I had fought so hard to keep had become something even more valuable, a home. Not because of its 4 bedrooms or beautiful kitchen, but because it was filled with people who chose to be there, who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. Sarah had been wrong. I didn't end up old and alone. I ended up surrounded by a family I had chosen, in a house that represented everything I had worked for, with a man who loved me for exactly who I was. The last I heard, my parents and Sarah were still crowded into their small apartment. Mike had disappeared after the divorce, leaving behind debts and broken promises. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they ever thought about the choice they had made to value appearances over integrity, convenience over love. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. I was too busy living the life I had built, appreciating the family I had chosen, and marveling at the unexpected ways that losing everything can sometimes lead to finding everything you never knew you needed. The house that they had tried to take from me had become the foundation for a life more beautiful than I had ever imagined possible. And as I watched Alex tend to our garden, as I listened to Aunt Maggie's laughter echoing through the kitchen, I knew that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well,